We're on it. Okay. All righty. So welcome. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
We are very happy. We are here meeting today for another heart-to-heart conversation. Today we are dedicating this topic to a Q&A, questions and answers for Elda Stepp on the topic of grief. So we will be dedicating today's conversation to different questions, different answers, and understanding of what grief is and what ways possible to consider viewing it. We want to thank you for joining us as you're logging in or you're joining us in this conversation. By all means, know that the intention for this is to build education and awareness around mental health. It does not replace mental health counseling, psychotherapy, consultation, or any form of supervision. In the case that you are interested or you believe you would benefit from individual counseling, you can always call our office. We could always provide more information, or in the case, we can always connect with resources in the community as well. Know that if you want to participate, by all means, you may ask questions, participate if you wish so. Just know that it isn't confidential. It is a community outreach experience that we are providing to the community to get resources and build awareness around mental health. So we are very grateful to be here. We had presented previously on this topic, previously in Spanish. We had the honor of having Elda reviewing and talking about this important topic in Español. And today we are dedicating it in English. Elda Stepp is a licensed professional counselor in Texas and a licensed mental health counselor also in New Mexico, and is also certified anger resolution therapist and is certified in grief therapy as well. So we have the great honor of having her share all her expertise and resources on this important topic. And I just want to thank you, Elda, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. So we're going to get started. Is that okay with you, Elda?
Of course.
Awesome. So basically what we are curious and what a very common question is, especially around the holidays and upcoming and with the season changing, and there's so many things that feel different as the season is changing in of itself. What is grief? How would you describe it? How would you define it from your professional experience? Sorry.
It's okay. So grief is just a changing. It's the end of something, right? It's really not necessarily like it's a bad thing, right? We always have this ideology that it's a bad thing, right? Because it creates a lot of emotional distress, right? But it's a very natural, it's a very healthy thing to experience when things are changing, when things end, right? When things are lost, right? The most, I guess, extreme form of grief, of course, is when one of our loved ones dies, right? Whether it is a family member, whether it is a friend, whether it is our fur babies, right? When we experience any type of loss that way, we tend to have these really emotional reactions, and it's normal, right? It doesn't consist of mental health issues. It's not a mental health disorder, right? The only time it does, of course, is when, it starts to interfere with your daily life outside of the mourning period, right?
I see. So it's something that is a normal experience or a common experience that we can experience. It can be something changing and experiencing a form of loss. And in some cases, it can be experiencing a loss of those who we love as well.
Yes.
Okay. And what we're wondering is if grief is a natural human experience, when can it become problematic? I know you alluded a little bit to that when you were describing about mental health and so on.
Yeah. And, we all grieve at different paces, right? It's not about, oh, well, uh, like an example, you moved from one state to another, right? And you're grieving the change, right? You're grieving the culture, you're grieving maybe your home, right?
Mhm.
And it'll take you a little while to kind of get into the groove of things of this new place and grieving the old place. And a lot of times we have this, concept of, oh, well, you need to get over it and start to enjoy the new things. Well, it's not really fair to say to someone, right? Because everybody grieves in a different way. And that's normal, right? That's normal.
Mhm.
It's not saying, oh, well, you have 9 days to grieve. And then after that, if it's,
Yeah.
you continue to grieve, it's a mental disorder or anything like that. It's more
Right.
on the lines of, you're starting to notice outside of the normal morning.
Mhm.
In other words, you feel so depressed, you can't get out of bed to go to work, right? You feel a lot of anxiety about the changes or about something else coming into your life or about death or about separation, things like that, right? To where you don't feel you're able to do the things that you normally did, right? Because, of course, with grief,
Mhm.
things change. We modify behaviors, we modify ideologies and things like that. But it should not be a dramatic change. If it becomes a dramatic change, right, within after a period of time, then that's when, mental disorders start to kind of demonstrate, not necessarily become mental disorders, but they start to demonstrate symptoms and, things like that. That's when it's more of a concern and it's time to kind of, okay, well, let me see what I can do about this. Let me ask for some assistance, some help, some guidance, right?
Right, absolutely. So that's when it would become something problematic. There would be an interference or an impact on your daily functioning. Granted, you are really like normalizing it, humanizing it, that there isn't this sort of like black and white, all or nothing systemic process, that it's actually very organic, and the timing, the pacing of everyone's processing of the grief and experiencing of grief. However, what you're explaining and what I'm understanding is that when it starts impacting like your daily functioning, maybe getting out of bed and maybe impacting your work and so on, maybe that's when it could be something that maybe need to be addressed in maybe more depth. Did I
Mm-hmm.
capture that right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly right. Because everybody mourns differently. For some people, it's really fast, right? And for some
Mhm.
people, it's a little slower, and that's okay.
Absolutely. And what I'm wondering, from your professional experience, what is your take on the stages of grief? I know that that's a very common thing that gets described or explained, or some individuals might even feel like I'm not in this stage or that stage. What is your take on it?
That's an interesting and important question, right? Because, when Kubler-Ross came up with the stages of grief, the
Mhm.
purpose of that study was studying people that were actually dying, right? These were the
Oh.
griefs of life and I'm about to die. So when we're grieving, right,
Mhm.
it's not about stages. It's about emotional state. Because when we organize grief, we're not allowing, kind of like what you mentioned, an organic process, an organic flow, right?
Right.
We start to question, wow, if I am not in denial right now, then I'm not normal. I'm
Mhm.
not going to be able to, flow through this grief process in a healthy way. Or, you know what, if I'm not in the bargaining stage and I'm more angry or I'm more, depressed or anxious or, whatever it is that you're going through, then
Right.
I'm not going to get through this ever. Right. Because a
Oh.
lot of people, they will shift. Some people will never be angry. Some people will never bargain, and other people may never be in denial, right? They quickly understand, you know what, this is actually happening, right? Think of, for example, um, a family member that's been sick for years and years and years,
Mhm.
right? Some
That's
people
right.
come to the realization, you know what, it's, better for my loved one to die because they're in so much suffering. There's no
Mhm.
denial in that. They don't deny
Mhm.
that, hey, this person's going to die. They are more on the lines of, this is so painful for them. It's painful for me. It's time, right? Let's relieve
Right.
the pain. Let's relieve, all of these other things, right? And there's no stage to that in reality. And that's okay, right? Because, we all, our perspective on death, on change, on end, on loss, any type of loss, right, is
Mhm.
different, right? So when we categorize, oh, well, there is this stage, second stage, third stage, fourth, fifth, sixth, and so on and so forth, we're not going to fit because we're not cookie cutters, right? We're all
No.
unique individuals. And when we treat grief as a cookie cutter, we're not grieving properly. We're not grieving in a healthy way. We're not
Mhm.
grieving organically, right?
Mhm.
So there's no really stages of grief. It shifts. Moment you'll be very, acceptant. You understand that this happened and there was a change, and then suddenly, maybe a week later, you're very angry because it happened, and then
Mhm.
another week later, you'll be very happy again, and so on and so forth. It'll shift, right, back and forth, and that's okay.
Absolutely. So basically, it's a very individualized experience and very different for everyone. It's not a cookie cutter. It doesn't say like it has to be like this or it has to be like that. And that there's a lot of fluidity too, that it can be very fluid and that it actually doesn't even have to have any state. It doesn't have to say, okay, I have to go through this. Like in the example you were providing, in some cases, there doesn't denial is not even a part of the grieving process because there's a lot of acceptance. And then the other thing is the origin of the stages. I believe that matters a lot when you were describing even, well, how was it developed? What was the intent behind it? And realizing that it was the stages that the of grief that are very, very commonly or shared or alluded to is the origin became from a place of individuals themselves dying and their stages as they were experiencing their own grief of their own sense of loss of their life. I see what you're saying. Not necessarily those who survive the individuals.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Got it. Okay. And one of the things that is very common um, a lot of the time there is nuances and important sensitivities when it comes to grief. And one of the things that is very common that individuals want to know or are curious about is what not to say when to someone who is grieving. What's your take on that? I wonder what comes up for this question.
This is actually the one that's going to define whether or not other more aggressive symptoms arise, if
Okay.
whether or not grief is going to flow in a very healthy way, right? Why is that? Well, because as a society, right, we still have this,
We're on it.
I wouldn't say aversion, but very, standoffish sense of what grief is and what it should be and what it should not be, right? When someone is going through something, right, specifically
Right.
loss, we we tend to kind of step back and feel, you know what, I'm helpless in the situation. I don't know how to help this person. So I'm going to help them the best way that I can. And a lot of times we make more mistakes than anything. So, what are some of the things that we shouldn't say, right? These are
Mhm.
what are recognized as, negative messages to from things such as, you know what, get over it. It's okay. It already
Mhm.
passed. It happened a year ago. Maybe you should try to move on, right?
Mhm.
Or, you know what, you are young, you can have more babies in the future, right?
Oh,
To,
mhm.
you know what, it was just a pet. I mean, are you going to really compare a normal life to that of a pet, right? Or,
Right.
you know what, it's in God's hands. God
Mhm.
knows what he's doing, and or whatever, your religious preference is. They know what they're doing, and this was in their plan, so on and so forth. These are very negative messages, even though the intention is not to be negative, right?
Mhm.
we're trying to help the person to kind of get out of that slump in a sense. However, it creates more distress, right? Because now you are taking away even the bit of control that they may have been feeling at some point. So for example, well, you need to get over it. It's been a year, right? It starts to create, well, then I'm not normal if I can't get over it in a year. If I'm still grieving this, I'm not normal, right? How are you going to grieve the death of your pet when you have all of your family members? Well, then that means, there's something wrong with me because I prefer my pets over anybody else, right? When we don't know what the relationship was, right? A lot of us, I know I love my fur babies a lot, right? I'd rather sometimes their company and right? And that's okay. That's normal, right? That there's nothing wrong with that. Or my favorite one, definitely, it's in God's hands, right? He knows what he's doing and it's in his plan, right? Then you create anger. It's like, well, then who is he to take away what's mine, right? Instead of allowing them, you know what? It's okay. Just feel what you're feeling, go through what you're going through, right? If they were very religious at some point, but we say things like that, at some point they're not going to be anymore, right? They're going to lose the faith. They're going to lose, whatever they had in their spirituality because they feel they've been robbed, right? They've been robbed. And those are messages that cause more hurt than anything. So being very mindful of what we say, right? Because grief is about listening, not about talking. When someone is grieving, it's more, let me listen to what you have to say, right? It's not, let me tell you what you should do, right?
Wow, that's pretty powerful, Elda, because I think when you describe that, something so simple, yet so profound and important to be heard. And a lot of times, the feeling is I need to say something to make it better. And a lot of the times what I'm hearing is when we're and just from experience and what you're describing too, is sometimes there's nothing that can be said to make it better, but the warmth and the listening of someone can go a long ways. So what you're describing is these negative messages can feel very invalidating for the individual, especially if they feel they have to compare their grief to those who are present, or it can cause complexities in regards to questioning, well, is this a punishment? Why has this happened? And I also captured a little bit that sometimes it can feel minimizing of what they're experiencing, like they shouldn't feel this way, that and that sense of like rushing through the process can actually cause more harm than good. Like this message of get over it type of thing can be very difficult because grief, we have to approach it from what you're describing, gentle, with respect, with a totally different approach. And that is when you were describing listening.
Yes. Yes. And being very mindful of, what am I feeling uncomfortable with? Right? Is this about me being uncomfortable with the grief that I see? Or is, am I comparing my own grief with what I'm looking at? Right? Because every grief is unique with, you know what? I went through exactly the same thing as you did. It's like, well, being very careful with that because everybody is very individualistic. Even if the situation was exactly the same, the grief is not equal, right? It's very individual.
That's a very good point. And it kind of goes to the next question that's very common, Elda, is how can a person validate someone who is grieving? So, for example, what we're understanding is there's to be mindful and be very cautious of these negative messages. But you mentioned something important. A lot of the time, the intention is to do good. What could be some positive messages, perhaps, or ways that a person could validate? Let's say they're listening. What are some other things that could be said instead, or maybe asked?
always ask for permission, right? Because when we impose, we
Mhm.
take away from them, right? But when we ask, right, we're giving them the control. Sometimes it's like, you know what, is there anything you need from me right now? And they'll say, probably not. Okay, perfect. To, would you like a hug? Is it okay if I hug you? Right? And they may say, you know what, I don't want a hug. I just need my space.
Okay.
Perfect. Right? Because if we invade these boundaries, right, we don't know how the person is processing, how the person is grieving, and how they're helping themselves feel better at that moment in time.
Let's see.
Right? Even simple, is it okay if I, give you an advice or something like that? Always asking for permission for them to continuously feel that it is their time. It's not about you, right? You're there to help. You're there to provide support. And just letting them know, you know what, if you just want me to sit here and we'll sit in silence. Perfect. Right? So it's all about asking them, what do you want from me? What would you like? What would you need in this moment in time? Right? Sometimes it's like, you know what? I just want to talk about random things. Let's talk about random things. Or, you know what? I want to talk about I'm angry, or, I'm frustrated, or, whatever it is. And just listening and validating a lot, right? Being able to tell them, you know what, that's a normal way to feel. And, it sucks that you're going through that, or things like that. But never, I understand what you're going through. More on the lines, I would never know what you're experiencing, even if you went through the exact same thing, because you wouldn't. We would never know.
Right. Absolutely. So what I'm hearing is being able to, number one, okay, asking for permission, even when we're tempted to give advice or to say something, of hugs, physical contact, making sure we ask for permission. And then asking also, it sounds like, for what they need or what might be helpful, like helping them guide us to show up there if we want to show up there for someone in that way. And then the other thing too is I guess you're describing is just to humanize even ourselves when you're describing, you know what, we might not really know what somebody might be going through, and that's okay. It's okay to say something like, I can't imagine what you're going through, but I'm right here with you. And that might be enough to be able to 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 provide that essence of validation, that their feelings are valid, and that in a way validating also just the experience of grieving, that there's no right or wrong way of experiencing our own grief. Yeah, I see. So, and some messages that you described is it's very common to feel that way. I hear you. Yes, it sucks that this hurts. That must be painful. Things like that type of language can go a long way. Did I capture that right, Elda?
Yes, most definitely.
Okay, beautiful. So let me go ahead. Excuse me. There's another important question on the how does culture impact the way individuals experience grief? What comes up for you in your professional experience when culture plays a role?
Well, culture plays a huge role, and we saw that not too long ago, right? Maybe even, what was it? I think it was, oh no, yeah, it was last week, the second, for Day of the
Dia de
Dead,
los-
right?
Ajá.
Dia de los Muertos. It impacts the way we grieve, first off, right? And the way we see grief, loss, death specifically, right? Think of, the festivities. And I know a lot of people through TikTok or Instagram have started to see all of the reels on, Day of the Dead, and, the parades, and, everything that comes with it, the little altars. I know New Mexico, Las Cruces was having a Day of the Dead in the Mesilla Plaza, they were having all of the altars and things like that, and people were
Oh,
able to walk around and look at, the people that they were mourning or they were celebrating, life after death. So it was really, really beautiful, right? It gave, that sense of unity back with those that we've lost, right? So it does. It creates an incredible impact on how we view death and how comfortable we are with death, right? Specifically, right? On other cultures, for example, would be in Ethiopia, right? One of the things that they do in some of the cultures is they'll create like a dance, they'll create like a festivity kind of to avenge for those that have died, right? Avenge their death against death, which is really interesting, right? So they'll dance and they'll sing, and they'll create these festivities to avenge the death of the loved one, right? So it creates that sense of unity, even with loss and death and grief, right? So yeah, definitely, culture has a lot to do with how we're going to process grief at some point in our life. Right? Because if we come from a very stringent culture where, death is wrong or loss of grief is a mental health disorder, then that's how we're going to process it. And it can create some sense of distress as we go through it, because we're all going to go through it in one way, shape, or form.
That's something that's a hard reality about life in of itself. One of the things that I know we had alluded to in our past conversation too is family cultures too, in regards to like the traditions, the belief systems, and the values that might even exist within little micro families too, in regards to how we might process it, how we might honor it, what we might practice in the process of mourning and grieving. What comes up as I describe this for you?
Well, it kind of goes back to the culture and adding into that religion as well, right? Think of how religion can also impact life after death, right? Christian culture, Christian religion, if you were really good in life, you're going to go to heaven. If you were really evil in life, you're going to go to hell, right? So we process that as our loved ones die, or as we're going through that grief, and we analyze, okay, well, am I going to be able to be reunited with my loved one after death, right? And it gives a sense of hope when it comes to grief and death and, dying. And it can be healthy, right? It's a very healthy context compared to a home that maybe is, doesn't have a healthy outlook on grief or death or loss, right? Especially if it's never talked about is in families to our children, because our children are going to experience some sense of loss at some point from their favorite toy. Right? For a child, it's devastating for their toy to have been broken or lost or doesn't work anymore. It's a sense of loss. And when we approach it as quit crying, it's just a toy, we're minimizing, we're invalidating that, hey, you're not feeling too well because you just lost something.
And it really mattered to you.
And it really mattered to you, because when they grow up and somebody dies or they lose something or something changes, they're going to have that mentality of, it shouldn't be this big. It shouldn't be this big, right? So then they learn to invalidate themselves.
I see. So loss can begin with just the items that are special to us, experiences. It could even be schools, like you're describing, schools changing. Like I'm just thinking about life in of itself and all the changes that we go through. Yes, there are new beginnings, but we also experience loss, especially if something meant a lot to us. Something was very special, of course. Well, on this note, I'm wondering, and what are some recommendations for someone who's experiencing grief? What would you suggest or recommend, if anything, to someone experiencing their own grief? If somebody was listening. Mhm.
Well, remember that it's normal, right? Whatever you're experiencing right now, from discomfort to annoyance to sadness to anxiety to anything that's going on, it's normal, right? Because
Mhm.
they are your feelings and your feelings are very valid, and it's okay to feel the way that you feel, right? It's okay to be mad at the world. It's okay to be mad, at the person that died or the changes that you experienced or whatever it is. It's okay. It doesn't mean that you love them any less, right?
Mhm.
Because grief is that. Grief is love. Grief is considered as love because this loss was a big part of who I was as an individual. And now I have to continue forward
Mhm.
without it or without you, right? So it's a loss of love. Grief is a loss of love, and that's okay, right? It's a really big concept. Imagine losing love. It's really shocking. It creates this mental distress, right? Doesn't mean you love the person any less, whether they're gone or they're there, whether you love the situation, the thing, the place any less just because you're not there anymore, right? If you start to feel that it's interfering with your life, right?
Mhm.
That, compared to maybe a few months ago that you were able to do a lot of things are now starting to fade away, maybe it's time to get professional help or at least seek some
Mhm.
advice, right?
Mhm.
So that it doesn't turn into something more aggressive, right? Because grief can turn into trauma if left unattended,
Mhm.
right? So that's one thing that's going to be very important to keep in mind, right? But everything else, it's normal what you're going through. It's normal to feel what you're feeling. I mean, emotions are emotions. I mean, have you ever watched I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but have you ever watched the movie Inside Out?
Mhm.
It it
Absolutely.
it explains, the most important emotions there. And if you're
Mhm.
experience any type of those emotions, it's normal. We all have
Exactly.
them in some shape or form, right?
They're primary emotions that really play a huge, huge role in the messages, and they let us know a lot about what we are experiencing. But I do like a phrase that I learned from Ana Gomez that feelings are messengers, and they have stories to tell. Absolutely. So, we're wondering, Elda, how can a family member or friend support someone who is experiencing grief? Let's say that they have a loved one who is experiencing some sort of loss. It could be either adjusting to a different change or experiencing a loss of a loved one. How can they support them or show up for them? What would you suggest?
Kind of the same thing what we had talked about. Listen, just listen to what they have to say. Listen to what their needs are, to what their wants are, what maybe they're missing at that moment in time, and asking for permission because they will tell you, right? They will tell you
Mhm.
what they want, they'll tell you what they need, they'll tell you what's important for them at that moment, right? From, you know what, I just need you to leave me alone. They're letting you know
Okay.
this is what I need. I need my alone time to process it. Or you know what? I just need somebody to sit beside me and just stay there. Okay,
Mhm.
cool. To I need a hug. I need a hug and I need you to tell me that it's going to be okay. Right? Simple things as that. Always listening. Always listening. It's more important to listen than to talk when
Mm.
somebody's grieving, specifically our loved ones,
Mm.
right?
Mhm. Absolutely. So it does come back to that message of earlier of how meaningful and powerful it can be to listen and sit with it. And you mentioned something earlier. It can be also an opportunity for us to be able to reflect and determine, well, how do I feel? What is happening for me when I'm experiencing this pain, this distress? Um, if when a loved one is experiencing it, it could be also an opportunity for us if we're trying to provide support to be able to reflect on it and kind of use it as a reflection piece to see, okay, well, where is this coming from? Is this a cultural thing? Is it a family thing? And then it could help us even be able to better understand ourselves too. Well, Elda, I'm wondering, do you have anything else you'd like to add? Any final thoughts as we are coming close to an end to this heart-to-heart conversation?
Nothing on my side.
Okay, Elda. Well, I want to thank you so much for participating in today's Heart to Heart and sharing all of these wonderful resources and input in regards to grief. We will be sharing any information to our website and then also our office. We are Counseling of El Paso. Our phone number is 915-209-1234. I'll be sharing the details here, and I'll be adding also additional resources for anybody who might be experiencing any form of crisis or needs immediate attention, as well in the live chat. Thank you once again, Elda. We truly appreciate you very much. And also, I wanted to add, we recently published an amazing, beautiful blog by Elda. So if you want to hop on in our website to see that too, it's great content in regards to our inner love. Thank you so much. And we'll be here again. Thank you. We'll be seeing you soon.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.